I'm super excited that we have all of these investors. If you guys want to come all come on up. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves. But really excited they're all here to chat with us and share their insights of working with portfolio companies, sort of seeing that evolution and being able to tie together your roles in these companies and with what sort of the board and leadership and everyone is thinking about. So appreciate you all for being here. Give them a round of applause. And Hadley, I'll start with you if you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll go on down the line.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Hadley Harris. I co-founded a seed firm based here in New York called Eniac Ventures. We started investing about 15 years ago, investing out of our sixth fund. My co-founders and I actually all went to undergrad together, studied engineering way back in the day at Penn, and then worked as developers for a while, and then starting and helping grow a bunch of venture-backed businesses. So did that independently for 10, 15 years, and then really enjoyed the early stages of company forming, kind of even before product market fit. So want to start a firm that really focused on investing at those. So we lead pre-seed and seed rounds, 12 folks in the team, all here in New York, but invest around the world, mostly North America. And then we're relatively generalist, but having engineering backgrounds, we tend to like stuff with a decent amount of tech. Certainly kind of developer-oriented businesses has been a mainstay of us over the last 15 years. So thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Hadley. Lori?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Moore. I'm a partner at Bessemer Venture Partners, where I invest from inception to Series A primarily, but the firm invests across every stage globally. I spent most of my career as an operator, so started as a researcher turned data scientist at a very small startup, mostly led product teams across early to growth stage startups, eventually started a company in the hiring space built on the very first BERT models. If anybody was building in those days, you'll know the models were very fun and interesting, but frankly not all that useful. So crash landed into LinkedIn, where most recently before investing, I was leading jobs product management and the jobs business. So I spent the bulk of my career with or as a data scientist and engineers, and so love the tools that support and help drive impact for that technical persona.
I'm Naomi Ionita. I'm a partner at Menlo Ventures. We are a 47-year-old venture fund investing from seed to growth. We're in our 16th fund, $1.35 billion, all in on AI. Proud investors in Anthropic at the foundation model layer, Pinecone at the vector DB layer, Unstructured and CleanLab at the data layer. And I focus at the application layer right now. A lot of dev and data first tooling, workflow automation, vertical software. I too came from the operating side, about 13 years building product. And then early in this whole product-led growth world, I was at Evernote early days and built out that first full stack product growth engine focused on getting more users, getting them to activate, getting them to pay us more, invite others, retain, all that journey. And so that was my segue into venture, was advising founders on those topics.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again for being here. We'll start by, can you tell us, Naomi, some examples of the portfolio companies you've worked with, some examples of how DevRel has really impacted that in different ways, whether it be growth, product, so on?
Yeah, I have a couple examples. One was Netlify, the portfolio company, and there was a lot of really early kind of organic growth and developer love. And when you talk to those founders, one thing they did to make that so authentic was written in the job contract for the first batch of engineers was you had to do a certain amount of marketing. You had to author blog posts. You had to put yourself out there. And it was just written into the job. And so it wasn't like DevRel was kind of like thrown over the wall to this one other person who owned it. It was all just like flowing out of the engineers, and it was developers talking to developers in a way that really spoke to them. That was a powerful hack that they did to just make sure it was embedded in the culture and everybody really felt a lot of responsibility. Then you kind of go to like just yesterday, we announced our anthology fund. We're large investors in Anthropic, and that is a new fund with Anthropic where Menlo and Anthropic will be co-investing. So we're not just offering capital, but we're offering credits, we're offering early access, we're offering company building resources from the Anthropic ecosystem and the Menlo team to set these companies up for success. So that's something that's more of like this like sort of community and resource play to really bear hug these next generation of developers.
Your first example reminds me, I'm sure a lot of people will know this, but at Twilio, everyone had to build an app. Early on to interview, didn't matter what role, and then kept going. Everyone there, you had to build an app, and that's how you got your track jacket. I'm sure both of you have examples too of how developer relations has impacted the companies you've worked with.
Yeah. One thing that you don't hear about as much with DevRel, you hear kind of as a company scaling, kind of building community, of course, driving growth, but actually at the very early stages where I tend to focus, it can be really helpful as a company is just kind of figuring out what they want to do and finding product market fit. I think of one company I work with, Cube, it's a semantic layer. We pivoted, I think, 3 times from when I led their seed round until we found product market fit and then kind of raised a A and a B. And it was kind of the DevRel function within the organization that was led at that time by the 2 founders that really kind of fed into that to kind of understand what was happening in the opinion of the developer community that we were just starting to build and their thoughts on each of these products that we kept launching it was when we kind of figured out what we were doing, it was really kind of driven by the community that we had built over that time. So it's kind of one area I think DevRel can help at the very early stages. A lot of people don't kind of think about.
I'll just add on one hack that a company I work with closely did recently that I thought was very intentional and has been impactful for them, DLT Hub. And so they're an open source Pythonic framework that connects any source to any destination. And the founding team just has such a clear understanding of where they do play and where they want to play in the ecosystem and whom they collaborate with and should over time collaborate with. And so something they started doing was just paying attention to the content from all of those other companies. And when they were even smaller, would repost, share content from those companies that they thought could be collaborating with them, and just built up a lot of goodwill in the ecosystem from their DevRel peers at these companies. And so now it wasn't with a transactional mindset, but now they're get an extraordinary amount of amplification on everything they post because of the friends that they've built up in the ecosystem and have been able to associate themselves with much larger brands.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you all. And I think the relationship side of it was talked about a lot earlier, and the champions you can build. Lori, can you talk a little bit to the aspect of how developer relations can align their function and the work they're doing to sort of the business objectives of leadership?
Yeah, I think too often I'll hear, especially from early stage founders that I work with, like, oh, we should have a DevRel function. Like you probably should, but let's start with why. What are the strategic objectives of the company, and why? What specifically within DevRel is it that's going to align up? And so I think, and I don't need to tell this audience, DevRel can do so many things, from top of funnel awareness to creating no more fertile ground for leads to be farmed from, to customer success and support, to informing a product roadmap. And so it can do all of those things, but being really intentional about what is most important to my company right now, so that in designing a DevRel function, you design the right function for your company at that moment, and then make sure that the specific tactics that you're trying are driving up to those metrics to just make sure that the learning velocity is going as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think, big companies are probably tying into some OKR process. Like, it's small companies. I mean, asking your CEO, like, what are you talking about with the board? And like, what is our North Star as a company, right? This question of like, are we trying to grow our developer base? Are we trying to better engage them and support them? Are we trying to move them from a free version of the product to a paying subscription? Are we moving up market from a PLG strategy to more enterprise and a sales-led motion? Like, you represent the voice of the customer. At my 2 previous companies, I was so passionate about this topic that I built out like a research org, and I also pushed that work to a bunch of different personas because I didn't want just like one person to own it. I wanted everyone to. But to own like the voice of the customer and the voice of the developer in a way that can be the glue and like the feedback loop into all these different teams, you should be helping run the beta community and like understand those customer feedback loops. You should be understanding what events have the most ROI, and we can like tie to like different marketing strategies. What features should we be building because people are clamoring for them? How can you kind of balance like product feedback with what the sales team is hearing too? There's just like being just like the go-to person to answer these questions just puts you in that power alley of what are we trying to do as a company, and how can I be the voice that's represented around the table, and not something that's just sort of like not that attributable and sort of off to the side. Like, what a powerful thing to represent as the voice of the developer. That informs everything. That's roadmap, pricing and packaging, it's strategy, it's revenue. So I just get really excited to think about like architecting those feedback loops and making sure that voice is carried through.
I like Power Alley. I think I'm going to steal that. But it's true, asking all of those questions and making sure as it evolves, you're staying very close to what everyone is focused on. Hadley, how early, maybe building on that, and as companies evolved and you were saying how early you're investing, how early do you think DevRel, or when do you think developer relations should be brought into a company?
I think DevRel is a kind of concept should be kind of at the very beginning of a company. I think it's really important when I'm looking at companies that are developer oriented that there be strong developer DevRel DNA within the founding group. When I was thinking back to kind of all the companies I invested over the years, and some that unfortunately didn't work out, there's one in particular I could think of that was an extremely strong team, and they just didn't have that DNA on the team. And then they tried to hire a DevRel professional, but to Lori's point, they didn't really have their kind of strategy in place yet. So it was kind of a question around what that person looks like and what their strategy was. So I think it's a concept that needs to be at the very beginning, and it needs to be run by the by the founders. You know, there's kind of within kind of SaaS companies, there's a generally known idea of like founder-led sales, and I think there needs to be like founder-led DevRel in the early days, and you need to kind of get as far as figuring out that early product market fit in terms of what you're building exactly, what problem you're solving, who you're solving it for. And then I think you can go through the kind of strategic questions of what you need from DevRel, what it's trying to do. And then I think you start kind of building out that team and hiring folks like yourselves. One plug I would say, kind of back to how important kind of DevRel DNA is on kind of a founding team. I think if I was you guys, I would be thinking about joining a founding team or starting your own company, because I think that skill set is completely invaluable amongst like a group of co-founders.
Sometimes it's just not called DevRel, right? You have like a founder who cares a lot about building a clean API and like really good documentation, or thinking like, what's our strategy around content and community? Like, we're having these conversations at the earliest stages with founders, but sometimes we're just not calling it DevRel, but it's happening.
Sort of adding on to that, do any of you have strong opinions about where in an organization developer relations should live?
I think it's so company specific, and again, like comes back to what is developer relations primarily driving top of funnel? Is it primarily driving engagement, which can inform upsell? But I think most important is that the leader, that's the functional leader, is passionate about developer relations and wants to represent that org with, in a way, to Naomi's point, that they know what's being talked about in the boardroom, and then they have a direct line to how the developer relations team is driving that objective that matters.
Also, I'd add, it needs to be kind of a first-class citizen. It can't be just kind of a small part of a bigger department, you know, just like marketing and sales and product and engineering.
A challenge for everyone, but agree.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe if we take this and dive more into the investor side of it, there we go. How does developer relations factor into investment decisions? How are you seeing it in those conversations and conversations with the board? All of that. Maybe Hadley, again, I'll start with you and we can.
Yeah, maybe I can talk, especially at the very earlier stages, kind of as I was saying, I've learned when looking at something that's developer oriented, that's selling and being used by developers, like that DNA is super important. I think you'll find at the later stages, then it becomes more of a kind of a department or a group of people that have that task that you need to dig into, and you guys probably have more experience with that than I. But it's like it can't. I mean, it's the equivalent again of having kind of go-to-market DNA on like a more of like a SaaS company. It's absolutely needed, and I've learned kind of the hard way. If you don't have that, you can really kind of spin your wheels. So I guess very important is the answer.
Yeah, echoing everything Hadley said, developer relations becomes the bridge between a company and a community. So as an investor, there's no better way to understand how is this product with being experienced by its actual users day to day. And then at the founder abstraction, how do they think about connecting with their community and customers? I love what Hadley said about the founder. Founders need to have that as a part of both their DNA and the DNA they impart on the company, because that is going to be a critical part of their go-to-market strategy. Even if it's not developer relations in the more traditional form or someone with that title, it is how are they thinking about engaging with their end user, their customer, and incorporating feedback into their product.
Yeah, something we seek in underwriting early stage investments is developer love. So before you're talking about DevRel, you're just talking about like, people just love this thing, right? People are just like jumping out of their chairs to like tweet about it, to tell their friends. They're all over GitHub. It's just like, you see it kind of organically spread like wildfire. And like that developer love is something that you can't manufacture. Like when you got it, it's just like so powerful. And so then it's how do we harness that? How do we get more of that? How do we replicate that? How do we amplify it? And so like that's what we're looking for, is just like that really authentic developer love. And then it's the go-to-market strategy that kind of wraps around that.
Yeah. I think so a lot around the developer love, the, strength of, this is kind of early brand strength, and the core of who the founders are. I guess maybe the next layer, we heard a bit in some of the talks earlier about metrics and how do you take some of the like production metrics into, business metrics, and results. Are there things like that if you're looking at a follow-on round or those types of investment decisions? Are there ways that you think developer relations can sort of present what they're doing that will help in those investment decisions from a quantifiable?
Yeah, 100% GitHub stars.
Yeah, it ends up mapping to different go-to-market strategies, right? That's why it's kind of embedded everywhere. So we think of like, okay, what's our content strategy? What do we need to put out into the world that's really, a good resource for the ecosystem? What events have ROI? Sort of field marketing now that we're all kind of back in real life post-COVID. So I think it's more like a channel strategy, like, what are we doing in person? What are we doing virtually? Webinars, content, go down the list. So think of that as more like broad marketing, but like, of course, DevRel, you're powering into all of those different channels really effectively.
I also think having that understanding, and depending on your stage, it might be a more mature understanding, it might be an early understanding of when I do this thing, it's a tactic that brings more people into my product. I know that when they land there, we can engage them. So having some sense of those early tactics, why you're doing them, and then as your company moves to later stages, then investors can look at that and say, oh, we know that if we poured more money into this company, they have an understanding already of what's starting to work or what they would try with it next. And they've shown that they can try new things and learn quickly. I know Hadley jokes about like multiplying GitHub stars times some factor and you get a valuation, because especially at the earliest stages, for me at least, it's much less about quantity and to Naomi's point, much more about developer love and that quality or depth of passion that someone has for the problem that you're solving, along with an understanding of who those people are. And then we start to test different ideas on how to reach them.
Great, thank you. What are there common misconceptions that you think that developer relations or other similar functions might have about like VC and investment?
I think we should give the audience a microphone and let's hear what.
Any message we can bring it back in Q&A, but we can come back to that one. We'll come back to that one.
In Q&A, I'd love to hear if there are any. If you
I would imagine that's the case. I'm just not sure what it would be.
What are the biggest trends that you're seeing today in developer tools? Hadley?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, there's a lot of stuff's driven by AI now, especially kind of the Anthropics of the world, kind of generative AI and some of the newer models. So I do feel like from an investment point of view, this may be obvious to you all or not. I feel like that's kind of taken up the entire airspace of the last couple of years across most sectors. I think developer tooling, maybe more than most. And I guess I'd probably kind of categorize them as two types within dev tooling. One is, obviously these models are really good at writing code, and that there's a ton of kind of companies that have been built on that. Obviously, you have stuff like Copilot. It's gone kind of completely mainstream, but a lot of kind of derivatives and kind of interesting other projects around just agents that can do things for developers around security, around checking code, or around QA. Tons of opportunity there. And then it also turns out that these models are really good at even writing config and designing infrastructure for organizations. So we're seeing more and more stuff around that. So I'd say that's a whole kind of bucket around, these models are good at writing code and kind of designing systems. And then there's a whole nother bucket, I would say, which is around, okay, all these companies want to utilize these newer technologies. How are they going to do that? There's a lot of kind of security around that. If you're going to have open source models, there's a lot around kind of deploying and pipelines and how you're going to maintain those things. So there's all this kind of tooling around how organizations will best utilize these technologies, where there's just, a ton of opportunity that we've been seeing and make a bunch of investments over the last 2 years.
Similarly, I think one of the things that's both fun and really chaotic right now is that we're seeing two simultaneous transformations. One is that we take work as it has existed in the engineering and data stack built over the last decade. We can now augment and change in pretty big ways a lot of the work that has been done with AI to automate code reviews, automate documentation. But then at another abstraction, we also have software development for AI as opposed to AI for software development. And so this is to Hadley's point around just the very nature of some of the tools that are needed, that are required to build with data or build for models in production that are changing dynamically. Just a fundamentally different tooling stack is required in some cases. So we're re-architecting the plane as we're flying it.
Yeah, and you guys are living this every day, but I've seen the crop of these kind of AI native DevRel in a box companies. We saw Nick present from Inkeep, and it's interesting to think about leveraging AI on top of all your technical resources and documentation, and being able to handle the Q&A more efficiently than going to your team and having to handle them manually one by one. But what that then unlocks is these bridges into the business side, right? Like if you have engineers asking questions about pricing or billing, it's like, flag that to a sales rep who can go in and convert a bunch of these individual developers into a larger 5-figure contract. So if you have these customer touch points right now that have a lot of efficiency and again, integrate with all these other systems of record across the business, I think it's very cool for those DevRel kind of questions to actually feed their way into more, hopefully revenue attributable moments with prospects or customers.
Yeah, you kind of took that where I was going to go, which is how do you see developer relations evolving? I think AI obviously is going to be a big part of that, but over the next 10 years, how do you see this sort of function evolving?
I mean, I think AI is going to automate away a lot of this sort of painful and mundane and busy work, but the human element is going to be even more important, right? And I think by automating away the painful and mundane, we can all focus on higher order problems and human connection and that community that feels really authentic. And so I think being able to like level up all of our work and do the things that the machine's never going to take away from us, we hope, right? We're going to still want to like be with each other and exchange ideas and collaborate. And so I think that just shift is welcome in the industry.
Yeah, I think there's an analogy with like the sales stack where like within the sales stack, there's like many startups at every part of it right now that are focused on every part of it. And I think, when you think about the problems of DevRel, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of understanding unstructured data. There's a lot of person-to-person communication. To Naomi's point, there's a lot of stuff there that can be automated, but also insights that can be gathered that were just not possible before.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges for this community will be as a lot of your rote tasks will be able to be automated away, but one person's automation can be another person's noise. So on the receiving end, the community, how do you break through when now would-be users, customers are inundated with more comms because the people who can send those comms can send them more efficiently? Or I had a company that this idea of being able to write personalized content for any for just a number of would-be integrations for their product. And so they're like, this is great. We can automatically write 400 of these, but being able to both automate while keeping their quality bar and then not deluging their community with something that is not at their usual quality standards just posed a whole new set of challenges to undertake.
Yeah, I think that could look like personalization at scale, where right now you're doing like a one-to-many exercise, but to be able to like meet people where they are based on what you know about them, what they have said on Twitter, what events they've gone to, what issues, what bugs that they've submitted. Like, wow, to be able to do DevRel in a personalized way, but like at scale, like that, I think that's where we get with the AI unlock.
Yeah, very cool. Well, and going back to what you were saying earlier, all of you, about how you sort of are thinking about these investment opportunities and how developer relations is a part of that early on. It's about passion and authenticity and all of that. So how can these things help like just amplify that? Well, wrapping it up so we have some time for questions, I think in closing, maybe what is one takeaway that you would want to give to this audience, these developer relations and related practitioners here?
I think making an impact and having that be something that's attributable. So tying to what is the number one top priority of the company, how are my efforts going to sort of direct line to that, and my team get to feel really proud of our work. And so that's the like sort of full trip of understanding the data impact and how it's rippling through the business.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I feel like DevRel right now is maybe at least went around the analogies with the sales stack. There's a lot that feels similar to where CS was 10 years ago before it was really recognized as the critical standalone function that it is. And so I think that over the next 5-10 years, there's only going to be more of an appreciation for how critical DevRel is in driving not a whole range of potential business objectives. And you all in this room are pioneers in this field. So I echo the point earlier. I think you're in a really interesting position to join an early stage company, start something, and help with some of these transformations that are inevitably underway in this function.
Yeah, Lori kind of took mine. I was going to say, I mean, as I said before, I kind of learned the hard way that I wouldn't make another kind of investment in a team and, in dev tools that didn't have like strong DevRel DNA on the team. So I think that's a really great position for you all to find some co-founders and start something cool and then hit us up.
Thank y'all. Do we have any questions?
And we have some companies hiring for DevRel. So if you want to talk, absolutely. Find us after.
I'm happy to run the microphone for y'all. Who has some questions for our lovely panelists? Knew it. Always count to 10.
So, I'm not asking for funding, don't worry. We've got funding. There was a comment there that CS took 5 years away from establishing itself. What did it do to help become established as a required function within an org?
Ooh, good history question. I think one of the biggest things that happened was with it was in the shift to SaaS, there became clear that a number of companies were able to prove a land and expand motion. And then with the development of outreach and some other tools, you had tools that defined a function by having buyers and budget around it. And so I think that also really helped elevate the brand and the brand of the function and awareness of its criticality around the table. I don't know, but do either of you see this transformation in a different way?
All right, cool. More questions. Oh, sure.
Let's go.
Sorry for hogging. I could have just come up afterwards. So DevRel is dead, right? So I've seen that 3 times recently. So I'm very interested to get the panel's opinion on why people are saying that and effectively what they really mean by that. So Sean Wang as an example, Keith Casey was at Twilio. Yeah, was a ZERP. Sorry, yeah.
That was like a
Still a bit of a spicy take there, right? Yeah. Anyway, so there's been, like Keith Casey, as I said today, or recently published something around that. So, what is your take on what they're meaning by that?
Maybe you can explain a little bit more.
Yeah. I think I'm going to try and restate the question, which was, you've heard recently in a couple different places, DevRel is dead. What's our take on why that might be trending? And do we agree or disagree? Why are people saying that? Is there any truth?
Is it just a spicy way of saying the function's undergoing such monumental transformation that it's now a 2.0?
I can take a stab at this. I think the endless just conference attending and just doing things that you don't know the ROI of, it's fun, right, to have budget and travel around, have great conversations with like-minded people, and then you come back to the office and people are like, what did we get for it? And you're like, I don't know, I connected with some people on LinkedIn and got a couple business cards so I think that era is over. I think it's over the I'm just going to do all of these things off to the side and not tie it back to the strategy, not tie it back to some real monetary impact, tied to some user growth number. So, but all of the activities of DevRel, that's never going away. Connecting to developers and creating real value and making sure that they're adopting the product and telling others and paying for it and expanding within the organizations, that's running a business. That's never going away. But it's just how the function is done and getting credit for it, I think, is the missing piece.
We got one over here.
Nice.
So I just want to piggyback on that question. So I think with developer relations in general, it's very, at least on our perspective, it's very difficult to kind of track what our full impact is, because everything we focus on is very organic. It's how do people feel about the product? Do they love us? And we might speak at a conference, somebody spoke earlier about 7 touch points before someone might come in as an inbound lead or something like that. So they might see us at a conference. They might read one of our blogs or somebody from the community, which might have been some of our efforts, or compares us to something else or whatever. And there's this journey that this user goes through before they ever touch the company. So for us, we see the value because we're on the ground. But what could we do to show our impact to the organization or to the investors to actually show a worthwhile investment so we can get more headcount or whatever?
No, I get this. A lot on the marketing side is people use last touch attribution models. And it's a bunch of other things happen before that. And you can't quantify it. So it's not just DevRel that feels this pain. We live this all the time with thinking about how to deploy go-to-market budgets with our founders. So yeah, you are not alone. It's hard. And I think where I'm going with this, were you guys users of Orbit and ComSort? There was that crop of, these DevRel platforms that came out that were trying to tie the activity doing offline with product usage data, with social, and how do you connect the dots that were never connected before? And so I do think what's the tooling that lets you at least see more constellations from all these stars, like that's one step. But I think just also coming back from that conference and being like, these were these 3 insights that I heard. I just need to make sure the head of product hears this from me. Like, you are representing the voice of the customer. So it can feel good and you can meet a lot of people and have a lot of interesting conversations. But coming back and being like, what were the 3 unique insights I heard? Or there's this pattern emerging and I just want to like a sounding board on it. I'm going to pull the head of marketing. Like, how do you just be the feedback loop person to make sure that like those narratives are tying back into the work that's being done in the office? So that I view as like a responsibility of like the qualitative.
For what it's worth, going back to the kind of AI stuff we were talking about, I think that a lot of kind of the understanding of unstructured data is going to get a lot better and is quickly getting a lot better. So there's certainly some like privacy concerns around having access to all these kind of touch points. But I think in terms of when you think back to like products like Orbitz, it was just kind of a little early in terms of being able to understand the unstructured data of what people are talking about, say in their Twitter feed and being able to tie it back. So I think there's going to be some pretty interesting developments there.
I could add on to that too. You said this happens across go-to-market. It's not just developer relations. And I can remember at both Twilio and Stripe when there was doubt that sales actually was being helpful. It's been proven later. But I think one thing that helps a lot of these functions, it's both showing the impact and the numbers and all that. But I think a narrative, and you were touching on this, being able to show a clear story and that voice of the customer with a narrative so that people can feel what it's like to be there. Because you know what it's like when you're talking to those people and you see them have the aha moment and things click and they get excited, and being able to translate that passion back to everyone who's not at those things so they see what people are going through and the transition. So I think bringing those stories and narratives back and repeating them and helping people see the journey. And the same thing with sales, like when sales is early, helping people see the journey that customers are going through, that voice of the customer, where their challenges are, when they're having the aha moments and getting excited. I think it's very similar across the board.
Your insight changes like roadmap prioritization, or your insight changes like pricing and packaging, or your insight changes like some customer segment that was like, that's board level discussion. And so like get credit for that, like drive that conversation internally.
Okay, I think we're probably,
no, I'm just going to do exactly what you're doing.
Oh, I was going to say we're at time. Is that past time? There might be some more questions, but we'll be around. But I wanted to say thank you, Naomi, Lori, Hadley, for being here.